Hey everybody, it is time for our third and final Enneagram series. I am Alex Hare. I'm the founder of Optimum Joy Counseling here in Chicago, and Pricilla Dean, our kind of in resident. We invited in our Enneagram coach who's in resident with us, but actually works over at Evergreen Counseling in the western suburbs in Chicago, and her and her staff are all in a way Enneagram enthusiasts. So Priscilla, this has honestly been so fun to have you on. And I think that like every conversation is like, we started with the core type,
Yep.
moved into the centers of intelligence, and now we're gonna really focus in our time today on Enneagram instincts.
Yes.
Which essentially, I always like to joke around with people. I'm like, the Enneagram isn't actually 9 types, it's actually 27 different types, which is not true. And also, I think they're that important.
Yes.
So, this is probably just for people who are watching, this might be a long one, but we'll go ahead and put all the time segments in the description, kind of like we did for the Enneagram centers of intelligence, so that you can refer to different points kind of as your Enneagram journey dictates and stuff. So, Priscilla, I thought maybe to start us, before I kind of turn over to you to kind of guide our time, I thought I would maybe read, because you have a really helpful blog on your website, and you were just telling me it's actually the most read blog
Yes.
on your website. And you have some kind of like helpful paragraphs in there on what the instincts are. So if that's okay, I'm going to go ahead and read that. And you guys, for reference, can find this on their website. It's called Enneagram Instincts, a Nine's Perspective on Subtypes, where Priscilla really dives into what does it look like to be a 9. And kind of walk through the different subtypes. So let me read this, and then we'll just kind of dive in, I think is
Yeah, let's go.
So, all right. Priscilla writes, instincts are 3 internal drives that humans have in relationships with others and your relationship with yourself. These drives are for survival first and foremost. They are evolutionary instincts to bond and to procreate, be social with our herd, and to self-preserve our safety and energy. And then the next paragraph, she says, at a more practical level, a person with a social instinct focuses on groups of people, like their family, their friends, their people, or the desire for their tribe. A person with sexual instinct focuses on one-on-one relationships, such as a partner, a bestie, or the desire for one. And then a person with self-preservation instinct focuses inward, such as being at home, on your body's practical needs, or the desire to be alone with yourself. So that's what you kind of put as a little bit of your introduction to the subtypes and the instincts. So where would be a good, other than that, where's a good place for us to start, just as we're kind of defining this for people who would be kind of like tuning into this?
Yeah, I mean, some people mostly don't start with the instincts, they start with type, which is great. But even so, when people are like, I think I'm a 3 or I'm a 5, but it doesn't totally fit me. And my next question is like, well, do you know your instinct? And so they're like, no. And so in that case, I refer them to Beatrice Desna's book, which is the most in-depth book. It's right here.
Okay, I don't have a copy.
I already referred to this like probably every talk we've had, because it literally is the only book that is written on the topic so far. And it says it's the 27 paths to greater self-knowledge. It's got this lovely tree on the front. It was written in 2013. Not too long ago. And she has a great, podcast and all that. She talks more about them in depth too. So if you're not a book reader, go to her podcast and you can find her stuff on the subtypes. But she really explains this very well if you want to find your subtype, because the idea is that you have a dominant subtype, but you really do have all 3. And so the interesting thing here is that your subtype really is your type plus your dominant instinct. So as a 9, I am a sexual dominant instinct, but I'm a sexual 9. So it comes before when we say it. It informs my type. I think in the blog, I call it the flavor.
Yeah.
So if you're a 5, you might be like, well, I don't look like that kind of 5. I'm this kind of 5. And that's really what it is. It's the flavor. And it really is how you act out your type. And it really is how you act out with yourself or with other people. So again, when you just stick with type, you really are missing out on a whole lot, because the generalizations and stereotypes, as we always said, can lead people astray, but
Yeah.
ultimately the type becomes much more specific.
Yep.
And I really find it fascinating that the Enneagram really is the only personality inventory or test of any kind that's really looked at human personality and included our animal evolutionary instincts.
That's
That's like not usually something that is included as important when we are animals and human at the same time. And a lot of the philosophers have said what, makes us different than the animals. And here it is. I think it's subtype. So
yeah.
really category of pure instinct. It's just animal.
Yep. Yeah.
How are we acting in a herd,
Yep.
for survival, and like, or maybe we really are social blind, as they say, we don't really know how to act in a herd. There's
Right.
like all these people around, we're like, let me find my one person, I'll feel safe. It's about safety and
Yep.
survival. So I think that's where people can start thinking about, where are my instincts kind of coming into it.
Yeah.
It is more default mode, even more than our type is. So we talk about type, you do it without thinking. This is even more so that way. So again, we're revealing blind spots in a sort of very inclusive way with our animal instinct and human instinct. So,
And I love even the way you're kind of talking about that, because it's almost like what we just naturally manifest into the world. And truly, and I kind of got a little bit of the sense from your blog too, when you're like, I don't look like other nines, was your experience. But I think even for myself is like, it wasn't until, because I misunderstood my type to be a 3,
Yes.
especially behaviorally. People look at my life and they're like, of course you're a 3.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until actually listening, I believe it was Jen Hatmaker's podcast where she had, I forget her guest, but some major Enneagram writer, I'm forgetting, but he challenged her and said, "Oh, I think you should look at a social 8 instead of a 3 and just see if that resonates with you." And like, long story short, Jen Hatmaker still identifies as a 3, according, I don't know, we don't know each other, so I can't really say that for her. But from what I can tell from her media, she still does. But that, when I heard that, I thought, oh my
There
gosh.
is, yeah, there's such overlap, and the type can get really tricky with that. And the book talks about that, about the differences. Social 8 looks like 3 and self-pres looks like 1 and things like that.
Exactly. So I think that, really practically, if people don't listen to anything else on this, I think what you hit on is, if people are struggling to find their type, or they feel like their type doesn't exactly fit, those are 2 very, very excellent. And obviously, just like the third reason is for more growth and stuff, but those first 2 reasons alone are excellent, excellent reasons to dig into subtypes. For clarity's sake, honestly, it made my Enneagram typing so much more clear. And to this day, people are like,
I think so too. Like the 9, like it's like I put in the blog, like I felt like I fit a lot of the basic motives of the 9, of like my sloth, and I mean, like, I do like to be comfortable in every way possible. But like, I didn't really have a lot of these stereotypes. So it turns out the stereotypes are actually kind of based on certain instincts, more than others. And I don't know why that is, but the stereotype of the 9 is more actually self-pres 9, which I'll get into, self-preservation 9 versus like sexual or social 9.
Right.
So I mean, like, and 8s too, you're going to think about the stereotype 8, not knowing, and be like, oh, that's not me, not knowing that there's a counter type in an 8 that doesn't look like the other 2 8s, but have, again, the same motives, the same drives, the behavior, the expression is different. So
yeah, honestly, to this day, people will say, oh, you're not an 8, or they'll be really surprised that I'm an 8. And I think it's because, and maybe you could say a little bit more about this, like the idea of a counter type.
Yes.
Within the 3 different manifestations, the 3 different instincts, there are 2 that kind of go with the fixation or the energy of the type, and then there's one that kind of goes against, or it kind of doesn't really look like the type, because it doesn't have the same.
It tends to look different. It tends to throw people off. I don't know why that is. I mean, I don't have a good description about why they exist, but I think it really is a great reminder in general that everybody's different, and you're not going to look like the other one. So that's, again, helpful for typing, helpful for self-awareness, helpful for this journey of self-exploration. So the counter types we're going to go through each type. And kind of identify how they kind of go against or look different than the other 2 subtypes within each type. So there's 3 types of 1, 3 types of 2. There's going to be a counter type 1, counter type 2, etc.
Yep.
So where should we start?
Yeah. Well, can I ask you one more practical question before we jump in? Is you already kind of said this, but some people use the language of stacking,
Yes,
which you said, oh yeah, there's one that you predominantly live out of. But can you
correct.
talk about, because I loved what you
Sure.
said, Priscilla, about when we were looking at the centers of intelligence, how you really have to reach outside of your
Mhm,
dominant center, I guess you could
mhm.
say, as a way to seek
Yes,
out
that
balance.
theme is here too. Yes, that
Mhm.
theme is here too. The theme of balance is also here. So yes, balance in your centers of intelligence, your head, your heart, and your body, and balance in terms of your instincts.
Yeah.
You can't do anything to change your dominant emotional center or your body center or your head center, but you can decide to reach out of that
Yep.
and bring more balance to your personality. Same with your instinct.
Yeah.
As I said before, the first step is really noticing which one is your dominant instinct. The second step usually is which ones are not getting enough attention. Interestingly enough, there's more of a sequence here involved. Like you're going to have your dominant instinct. You will also have a secondary instinct that sometimes you'll go to in certain situations, certain environments, certain relationships.
Mhm.
Um, and those are the two you tend to alternate to, but you still will always come back. Your dominant instinct is the one that's you're most blind to, the most driving. And you have this third instinct, whether it's self-pres, social, sexual, that is you're blind to. It's like it's something you forget is there, you don't think is important, and you tend to neglect. And it causes you a great amount of suffering, actually, um, regardless of what that looks like. And I think that that's really interesting. And we talked about like how, neglecting if you're a head type, neglecting your heart and your body can cause you suffering too. So it's very, again, similar here, but I kind of think that focusing on the dominant and the repressed instinct is really important for, as we discuss this,
Yeah.
for your own personal work of
I
like, go
oh,
ahead. No, I'm done. That's kind of what I'm looking at.
I just love that you said the word repressed,
Mhm.
that's the one, again, it's kind of there's different ways of growth. One is knowing your core type, one is knowing your core and like your dominant and stuff. I'm getting all my language mixed up. But then also to know what you're not utilizing or you're repressing.
Yes.
So even
It's
like
how it's hurting you. What you don't know is hurting you.
absolutely. So even for like people just to have like an example before we get in, it's kind of like if I'm a social 8 as my
Mhm.
dominant, I am actually sexual or one-to-one in kind of my neck stacking, and my self-preservation is my most repressed. So that comes out all the time. When
We're gonna need some examples, Alex.
oh, I'm sure. So I put that out there on the front end just to be like, oh, this plays itself out pretty
Yes.
realistically and practically.
Mhm.
And so let's get into it.
Let's get into it. I think it's great because I think that I have actually also repressed self-pres. So I think we'll have some funny stories to share that might actually illuminate that idea. Um, but I think that's interesting because sometimes I've found, well, I'll leave the last thing before we dive in, that people that are dominant in the same instinct tend to have more in common with each other than even people of the same type. Like because the actions are so, and the values tend to be very different. Like if you love groups of people and like you love like you're gonna, and you find another person that marries into your family who also loves a group of people, you guys are gonna be planning Thanksgiving together next year, like that is like your thing. You might be like a 2 and an 8 or a 9 and a 4, it doesn't matter. Like that you can have more in common sometimes. So that's really interesting as well to kind of think about instincts are that strong in that way.
Yeah.
Okay. And the opposite goes for if you have different instincts, you're gonna really not understand other people very well. Okay, should we start with body types? I thought that might be fun. We'll
Yeah,
start there.
I think so. I think that's a good why not? We left them
Okay,
out. We made them wait last for our
yeah,
centers of
we did.
intelligence. So it feels like we should start with them
Let's
this
start
week.
there. Okay, 891. Prior to the body types. This is interesting, and I do want to talk about, every time I talk about a subtype, I thought it'd be good to talk about the passion or the vice.
Mhm.
This is not a deep dive necessarily, although it can be with each type. The blind spot of the instincts is really about how you act out through your passion. So the passion kind of goes inside of these behaviors. So for the 8, which is lust, the lust is inside of your acting out of your instinct. So, and I'll illustrate how that looks like, but each type will go through the vice, the passion.
Yeah.
There is no upside to the passion. There's no positive way to look at it. It always brings pain and suffering. I mean, with a type, we can say the light and the dark, and here's how it's good, and here's how it's bad. Even with centers of intelligence, you know, this is how it's good, this is how it's bad. This is no, the vice is just bad. And this is where we get into moral qualities, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But spiritually speaking, it's about like we're human, and we cause ourselves suffering and other people suffering every day. And we need to not take ourselves so seriously and think that we can be perfect. Like, this is humbling in the really best way, I think. So
Yep.
keep that in mind with the passion. Don't get too hard on yourself. Shame has no place. This is safe.
Amen.
We all have them. Okay. 8. Should we start? Let's see. The self-pres 8. Let's do self-pres, social, sexual. As I said, like, what's a good definition of lust, Alex? Because lust is not, people think of it as in usually sexual terms.
Yeah.
Lust is usually, how I define it, is a desire for more, or going after more, like the action of going after more.
It's almost, you know, I think about it for myself in a couple of different ways. I think sometimes like the intensity language,
Mm-hmm.
also almost
Yes.
like, insatiable appetite,
Yes,
maybe is the
insatiable.
going after more. It's just kind of you know, it's probably why I'm one of the like most like not contented people out there, you know, but it is this kind of like almost like there is kind of a sensual, or for me, like a visceral quality about it. But sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
literally can be like, wow, I just ate myself sick, you know, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
really enjoying this music, or like
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna grow my practice so fast because there's always the next thing to go. You know, it's just kind
Yes.
of a
Yeah, it's visceral. I like that. It's hard to describe probably because it is very like your body type. So it's like very like,
yeah.
it's a driving force. But as especially as we're getting into instincts, talking about like, let's start with self-preservation 8. Self-pres types tend to be a little more introverted, not
Mhm.
always, but they tend to be, again, that the survival is focused on the safety needs, security needs. So that includes food and shelter. And so I kind of wrote here my notes here about the self-pres 8. They can't find enough safety. They can't find enough of the right kinds of like shelter and food and power. Because again, I think power is really a big word for 8s too in that lust. So it's like this insatiable need. If you're a self-pres 8, you can't get enough of these things to help you feel safe. Again, we're going back to survival here.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
There's always more to do to help yourself feel safe. They're less verbally expressive. They're not the counter type. They're definitely an 8. They're very direct. They're very strong. They like to protect, just like all 8s do.
Yeah.
But their relationships can suffer when you're in survival mode only, which is also a good teaching point for all the instincts.
Yeah.
It's like focusing on survival, our relationships do suffer. So self-pres 8s tend to just focus on the practical needs of getting more.
Yeah.
And so that has nothing to do with people at all. Their significant others or their family members or whatever.
Yeah, and even this, I was kind of flipping through this book, and it's like the title of like satisfaction is given to
Yes.
a self-pres subtype, and really just like highlighting it's like an intolerance of any frustration. That like
Yeah.
if there's something that's frustrating me, my well-being, my satisfaction, I'm gonna move against that. You know, which is
Okay.
like a fixation on like material, like
Mhm.
sleeping or just like all that different stuff, you know, but just really kind of like I'm gonna get my needs met. You
Yes, no
know?
matter what. And they're not showy about it. I think some other types are like, I do what I want, look at me. They're more reserved in that way. They just do it.
Yeah.
And they can garner a lot of respect for that kind of personality. But
Mhm.
it is generally like, there's just not enough of it. The instinct doesn't make you happy. It's an animal instinct. It's just this driving force to go and find more of that satisfaction, and it doesn't ever deliver somehow.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that they're protective. And let's see yes. Let's go to social 8. That's yours. You're the
That's
counter type.
yes. And even this title gives us solidarity, which is
Oh, I
interesting.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
They're different now. How do you? So I think that what I read on the social 8, what I know about them, they tend to be a little bit more friendly and pro-social. It sounds bad about the other two eights, but in general, I think that's what kind of gets them. People think eights are assholes and eights are too much. They don't care about people, and that's ridiculous and not true for any of the eights.
Yep.
But especially the counter type here, you are very aware of other people. You're very aware of your people, especially.
Yep.
As a social type, you're going to look at the group, and you're never going to get enough of what the group needs.
No, yeah. Well, it's even just like really interesting when I think about sometimes what drives me forward is my a sense of belonging, you know, and
That's a good way to describe
always
it for
been,
social.
yeah, I've always just kind of been like, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? And even I would
Mhm.
say in my vocational working world, I've kind of created my people between like my team. Those are my people, you know, or like my
Yeah.
family or my friends.
Mhm.
With work, it's almost kind of like this is the ultimate place for me to belong. But I think that probably social aids come off a little warmer, a
Mhm.
little more people to, you know, there can be kind of you know, whether an eight would think they're domineering or not, a lot of people experience them as domineering for a variety of reasons, you know?
Mhm.
So I think that social aids is why everybody I think says, oh, you're probably not an eight, you know, you're too nice or something like that.
You're
And
too nice.
you need to do a
Your
stereotype.
people skills. Yeah, this is where stereotypes really break down. But you're right. I
Yeah.
think the eights are more people. Social eights are more people centered
Mhm.
because they're social and their group really matters to them, and so the group's needs. The
Yeah.
lust comes out where there's not enough ways to take care of the group, protect the group. Like you were saying, like make the group thrive. There's always something else to do. That is like lust in action for that social eight.
Yep. It's all that
Um,
protection and that intense loyalty,
yeah, ooh,
that
loyalty. I like that one.
solidarity towards my
Yes,
people. Yeah,
solidarity.
absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's very unmoving. It's very like concrete wall. This solidarity, like it's very, like, which is it's great. It's very body like forceful. I like it.
Solid.
Um,
What makes it that word? No.
what?
I said solid is in the word
Yes,
solidarity.
it's very solid. Yes, exactly. Where like not all types can come off that way within their instinct. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
let's see. Okay. That's what. So we kind of describe it as a counter type. They look a little different than the other two eights because the sexual eight is more probably like the self-pres eight. They're a little bit less about like other
Mhm.
people in the group. But
Right.
for what I understand about sexual aids, I actually don't know any personally, which is kind of surprising. Um, I haven't really run into them too much. But what I do understand of what I've read and kind of listened to on podcasts is more so that they tend to be very intense and possessive. And so they can't get enough of that intensity and possession for other people and even environments.
Yeah.
So there is this sense of like, I own this space, I own this room, I own this relationship. And so the power and control of the lust is like gets really overwhelming with that. So I think Beatrice calls them possession. What does your book call sexual aids? There's
They
like a title
yeah,
usually.
all in possession, because I think that these titles that I have
Possession.
are actually based off
Are
BS
the same on Beatrice Chestnuts. Okay.
possession. Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
they can be. They also learned that they're the most emotional eight too, which is interesting.
The eight
I think in
in a I don't think volatile is exactly the right word, but big. Kind
yeah, just big feelings. Everything's big, right?
Mhm.
Big
Yep.
ideas, maybe big energy, and probably big feelings, to some
Yep.
degree. And so like I think that sexual is usually any sexual dominant that's listening, we are very intense people.
Mhm.
Even a sexual nine is nines tend not to come off as intense. You really know me long enough, you'll find out, whoa, that's kind of intense, Priscilla, calm down. Intensity is usually the word people use to describe a sexual type. So with eights, it's already kind of an intense, domineering kind of fixation for their type. You're going to find that sexual intensity and have quite a powder keg of personality and instinct. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
okay. They're really rebellious too. I forgot about that piece. There's
Mhm.
this rebellion piece. And I don't think that social eights are like that as much. I think I think this is more common for self-pres and sexual eights. They're
Yeah.
like stick it to the man as a way of living,
Yep.
as like for fun and also to do it. And it's important to do it, to flout the general expectations of people and authority. So I think social aids, it's less important, right?
Well, I think that it's still it's probably still rooted around a little bit of rebellion, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more kind of I'm gonna figure out what the system is and use
Okay.
the system to get
You'll use the
you know,
system versus
it's kind
fight
of
it
I'm
and
gonna go
create a
with
new
the
one.
system instead of like burn it to the ground essentially.
Yeah, and I think the other two are like, let's burn it.
Yeah. Yep.
But
Yeah.
Sometimes it needs to go. So, okay. Like I'm here for that energy sometimes. I have a sexual type, so you know.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the 8s. Let's go to next 9s. Okay, yeah, that's here we go.
Yeah.
Pres 9s. So Beatrice Chestnut calls these appetite.
Mhm.
Which I like. I think that kind of limits it a little bit to food, but I think it can be also about structure and routine. For self-pres, they're very practical kind of people. I like creature comforts. I had some clients that sexual self-pres 9, sorry, and they tend to be very like creature comforts. Like it's very important on an emotional deep level to have their comfortable chair, their comfortable slippers, and their nap times. And you know, don't mess with those things. Their snacks.
Yep.
It sounds like they're very cuddly, and they are. But in the dark kind of the shadow type a little bit, they kind of substitute, and this is what Beatrice teaches about self-pres 9s, they substitute all these creature comforts for human love and acceptance. So like that's kind of like, it becomes so important that they'll like say no to going on a dating website, or like they'll like, I need this more than I need anything else, which again is the sloth, which is falling asleep to your life. Sloth is the vice of all the 9s. And so self-pres, it comes out more on, if I just watch this TV show for the billionth time, I'll feel safe and I don't need anything else. And we really start to believe that self-pres 9 do. Asleep to their emotional needs inside the routine.
They kind of need to wake up to their emotional needs because they thought they get so into their physical comfort and well.
Correct. Yes, it becomes everything. Yes, again, like that drive is so strong, the self-preservation need for surviving, keeping your nest cozy, your body cozy, because again, we're body types. So 9s are like, my body needs to be cozy, so I'm going to buy these kind of sweatpants and, you know, have these type of food at my house. It doesn't have to be the nicest stuff either. It's just what feels comfortable. And so there's a loss of self.
Yeah.
That's in the sloth for the 9. So they're not, again, they tend to be introverted. They tend to feel nervous around other people. Sometimes there's, again, sometimes social anxiety with self-pres 9s. And because they're not as direct and they're more within inward driven.
Yeah. I have the description written down in my notes that they urge with the experience of just satisfying their concrete needs. Like it's
very practical, very concrete. Yes. Yes, it becomes like, and people love self-pres 9s. I'll say this. I don't know. I know a couple of them, and I had a couple clients that were, and they're very lovable people because they are like, they remind us all like, hey, you know, we all need routine sometimes, and it maybe the best thing to do is go home and take a nap. So like, while people like praise that, remember if that's their struggle, then don't praise it too much. You know, they can forget to show up for their own life. And anger, interesting, comes up for this too. Beatrice Chestnut has an example of a self-pres 9 in the book, and she said it was funny. Someone was in a conflict with their spouse or someone, and person who's a self-pres 9 said, I was so angry, I just needed to go home and take a nap. And like, if you're like an 8 or like another type, you're like, what? So that's not how you handle your anger. But self-pres 9 is like, oh, I totally feel that. It just becomes so like, I need to go and feel safe. Okay, bye. It's just too much. It's too much. This party is too much. My anger is too much. I'm just going to go sleep.
Yep. Well, honestly, there is a little bit of like behavioral stereotypes like that, because when you get in this level, it's kind of there's like, in a strange way, there's consistent themes across the subtypes and stuff like that. You know?
And the sloth here is very easy to see. It's like, oh, you're actually napping. You're actually just watching TV all weekend, and that's all you did.
Stereotypically sleepy 9.
Yeah, stereotypically. So people think of 9. So that's when I was on like these Facebook groups, and I'm not a self-pres 9. I'm like, I don't like naps. I feel like unproductive, and I don't feel like I'm connected with anyone, so that they feel boring. Currently I'm pregnant, so I love naps at the time that I'm saying this, but that's a different reason. I still sometimes feel like I'm like, oh, I need to go clean the kitchen. But, you know, self-pres 9s are like, there's not enough of that kind of relaxing time, you know? So let's see, social 9, counter type. These ones look not social 9s don't look like the other 2 9s. They are, then the reason for that is they go against the sloth because it looks like they're very engaged. They look like their behavior, they're chatty, they know how to, they're really great social skills. I mean, like, it's impressive. The other 2 of us 9 sometimes struggle on the social end of things. But they are like, they know how to like keep the conversation going. Oh man, if things start getting a little tense, they know exactly what to say, what kind of joke to put in there. Like they're like smooth in the waters. So again, no one's really gonna type this person as slothful for sure. The question becomes, where does sloth show up for these social nines? Right? It's like, where is it? And it's called, I think, participation. Is that right? I forget.
Yep.
It really does come, sloth comes in the group and in the family, in the work team. You have no idea how they feel or what they actually think apart from what the group needs. It's very sneaky.
Well,
They're asleep.
exactly. And I have written down that because we think of merging with nines, that they
Yes.
merge group for group interests.
Yes.
That's the reason why they look a little bit different, because they can actually be very busy with the interests and needs.
Interactive.
Does that
Yes.
merging has happened.
But it's about the group. It's really, if you really pay attention, it's not about them at all. It actually never is. It's never like, well, I don't really agree with that. Here's what I think we should do. They're not going to say that. They're going to say, what a great idea. I love that. Let's keep talking. That's what they're going to say.
Yeah. So then what about the one-to-one? Obviously, this is the one you resonate the most with, but what about like the one-to-one? I have the word fusion here, but I don't know if that's actually the word.
Yes. No, it is. Sexual nines are called fusion. And I think it's best because, as you said, the word merge, which is kind of confusing word for people that aren't nines. I'll try to define it. It's key for all three because I think social types really merge with the group. They lose themselves, they fall asleep. And then self-pres nines can merge with environments and practical needs. But sexual nines, they merge with you.
Yeah.
I just said that in a really creepy way. But that's my experience. So the merging is sloth, I would say, a type of it. However, I think it is different. I'm still parsing this out. So as an external processor, I am extrovert. I'll see if I can kind of think about how I see this as different as sloth. It's easy to define it as sloth because merging is like a loss of self within another person's experience. So sexual nines tend to believe there's nothing I can offer the other person. So I will take your energy and live my life through you. It's kind of vampiristic in kind of a weird way.
A little sleepy or slothful in the sense that I'm not going to put in the energy to develop my own self.
Correct.
Just
yes.
More self and
I'm not bringing anything. I have an empty cup and here, I'm going to take some of yours. Yeah. And it's very unconscious. It sounds kind of malevolent the way I'm putting it. It's usually like, I have no idea I'm doing this. So we tend to be very nice in that way because I'm not bringing anything. If I was bringing anger or an opinion, now I'm bringing something. So that's different. These sexual nines are usually very sweet and nice and caring. And before I did a lot of my work, that was how people described me, as just like super nice. But I also feared I was very boring. And it turns out I was kind of right. Because when you come to people with nothing, there isn't anything there. I mean, truly, of course, there's other things under the surface. But I suspected with my intuition that I was kind of a boring person. And it was because I had not taken any time in my sloth to develop my own interests, my own ambitions, and my own hobbies, et cetera, et cetera. And to do that, all of a sudden, I was like, oh, okay, I like myself. That's good. There is this sense of sloth when it comes to myself and in my relationships. So when I'm in relationships, or sexual nines are in relationships, they have to really be keeping an eye on how they unconsciously take on the attitudes, the opinions, the desires and needs. Like nines are the classic joke with a nine is where do you want to go for dinner? Like, I don't know, wherever you want to go is fine. And that's true. And it's not like nines are lying when they say they don't know, but they end up halfway through being like, wait, no, I had an opinion. I don't know how to say it, but now I know it. They don't know how to say it later because it usually takes a minute to marinate about what they really want.
Yeah.
So sexual nines specifically, they tend to have a little bit more of again, an introverted nature sometimes, or extroverted. They tend to be going inward, and with that, they're fixated most on other people. There's this conscious rejection of self, unconscious rejection of self, and thinking about you and you. It's not the group at all. In fact, social was kind of blind for me for a while, so I didn't really give a shit about the group. But the one-on-one was these people, what they think of me, what I think of them, this is what I'm fixated on. mostly what they thought of me. I didn't really know what I thought because again, that's rejection.
Yep.
So that's the 9 and the sloth. The fantasy life, they can look like 4s. I will say this, sexual 9s can look like 4s. There's a lot of overlap because that inner life is really rich. You wouldn't necessarily know that, like, but in high school I was really into Lord of the Rings, like real bad. I still am. The movies are great. The books are even better. But I really did. You're laughing so hard. That's too hard. Like, stop laughing. Um, but it was like I lost myself. It was great. I had a rough high school experience. So like I would, and this is when the movies were coming out. That's how old I am. And so I would just be like, listen to the soundtrack and just really like lose myself. And this is kind of a 4-ish thing to do. The difference between the fantasy life, though, between a 9 and a 4, is that 4s are a little more tragic. There's more of a dark ending. And for the 9s, it's always like this happy, like relaxed, comfortable feeling at the end. It is really more true escapism of like, everything's good in my little happy place in my mind. I don't know why the sexual 9 does that more. It's not really about other people, but that has been something I've experienced with clients, and I've read about that too. So, yeah.
Well, it reminds me, you know, sometimes I think, I don't know what it would be for the social, but when we think of self-preservation, it kind of feels the most like what we think of like a core type 5, that it's like
Yes.
really about preserving my own self.
Yes.
Kind of, I think that the one-to-one or sexual has that, you know, if we think about like a 4, it has flavor or vibe because 4s have this intense longing
Yes.
through jealousy of what's, you know, what can I have? Kind of
what don't I have right now? What could I get? Yes.
yeah. So I think that makes sense. And I don't know if social would maybe be like 2 or something like that. I don't know. I can't really think of that. But there's like a feel. It's why you said you'll probably feel more connected with someone who has your same instinct. Like if you're more me focused, you're probably going to vibe with somebody else who gets the me focus. And
Yeah.
if you focus one-to-one, then
Oh yeah, there's a lot of intensity there.
there's that sizzle of like, ooh, this person I talk to and I really like, you know, and then
Yes.
the we of like, you
Like,
know,
yeah, we get this. This makes sense. You understand it. I understand it. We don't have to talk about it.
exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Again, I think it's as you think of them as we go through these, I wonder, like, because they're again, certain subtypes will look like other types. So it might be helpful for other people. So I think self-pres 9s can look like 8 sometimes. I prefer because they're very stubborn. And they can be more assertive than the other 2 9s. Sexual 9s can look like 4s. So, and I think social 9s can look like 3s because they're really hardworking, and they get a lot accomplished without thinking about it. So 3s do that too. So keep that in mind for typing. Okay, let's move on to 1s. Self-pres 1. So their vice, passion is rage or anger. This is a driving force that goes inside their dominant instinct, specifically. So the self-preservation urge to take care of your environment and your bodily physical needs, there's anger there. So when we think about that, it's actually about perfectionism the most. We think about the stereotype of 1, I think it's probably self-pres 1 to some degree, because they have the harshest inner critic. That rage is directed inward. It's not directed outward in any way. So they're very nice to other people. So you wouldn't necessarily never see them as a 1 or type them as a 1 unless you really knew them, how hard they were on themselves. And anger is really harsh with themselves. And they're super kind because I think that's the good way to be. And so there's that really difficult dichotomy to hold. They're really kind to other people and so cruel to themselves. So there is this harshness. They kind of walk that line. That rage is like there's never enough like perfectionistic energy. You could always like improve yourself more. So that's where the instinct can get like out of control with these self-pres types 1s.
It's almost like that I just have the note written down, being perfect, that it's like that
Yes.
or that rage is turned towards the me focus. How can I improve and control me most perfect that it can be? So they actually are really kind of like, I need to be perfect.
Yes, it's very sad. I mean, all of these are kind of sad, but it's really just because you wouldn't know. That's the thing. Like a lot of this, like you can tell when a 9 is being slothful. You're like, okay, that makes sense. But the self-pres 1 is like they're so kind and they won't try so hard to do the right thing, but they tend to have this really harsh critic with themselves, and most people, like, they keep it a secret, you know, no one would know. And so I've done some work with some self-pres ones, and like there is just like the things that they allow themselves to. I'm like, would you say that to anyone else? They're like, oh my gosh, never. I'm like, okay, then why is it okay to say that to yourself? There is this anger that's really hard to control, just rage. It's like very bodily focused too, like internally. So that's the self-preservation one. Very repressed in the anger. They might not always associate it as anger necessarily. They'll think of it as perfectionism or like being better.
Yeah.
The passions are tricky. They don't always, like, the word itself can be misleading. So that's why I'm trying to be like, well, this is how it tends to feel like or look like within these things.
Yes, exactly.
Social ones. Well, they're called the, I don't remember what off the top of my head.
Let me look.
I want to say, non-adaptability.
Oh, that's what I had, but I was like, I don't feel like that's the right one, so I was gonna flip back.
No, I remember now. It is non-adaptability, which is kind of a strange term for it. I think that that sounds more like an 8. I think what it really means is that because they're focused on the group, the anger comes out in the group. But again, because it's half repressed with as a expression, and it's bad to be angry. I think all ones really do feel it's morally incorrect and bad on a gut level to be angry. So it comes out in perfecting the group or society or the family. And it comes out in this kind of expression is, I know what is right for society. Yes, there's a superiority, which maybe looks like a non-adaptability. If someone tries to influence a social one, I think that'd be really tricky to do, especially if they're really strong instinct forward. I think a social one on a growth path would work on being influenced by other people. But there's this sense of when it's a social one, the vice is out of control. They won't listen to anyone. There is a sense of, I know what is right for you. I know what's right for society. They're like the class ones that get mad about like people parking incorrectly, and like they're like teachery in certain ways, and can really like harm kind of relationships in that way, because it is a little more distant. It's like it becomes about issues and principles versus like people and how people feel about how they come off, et cetera, et cetera.
I just have written down that they're the ones that set the example.
Yes. Oh, yes. Correct. So there's that teacher, like, I need to be above it all, which really is kind of lonely and alienating for a social one if they really pay attention to that. Like to be set apart, like, can feel good to your ego on like an unconscious level, but like over time, like nobody can reach you at the top. It's kind of lonely and cold there.
That's true.
So there's that. Then we come to the counter types. So social ones on counter type. The social and the self-pres are more like the typical ones. And the counter type is the sexual ones. This one can type more like an 8 because they're pretty intense. Again, we got that, use that word intense for a 1. They're pretty leadership oriented. They take control pretty well, like an 8 does. So again, behaviors, but the reasons they're doing it is not for power, which it would be for an 8. Right. Or control. It's probably more to control, but also for the good. Yeah. So go ahead.
That it's like improving others.
Yes.
For their best good. I know you have potential in you, but it's kind of like a little bit of that perfectionism driven into the one.
Yes.
You could be better. So,
yes. I'm going to improve you. Yes. Yep. I want to improve you, my spouse, my person, or even society to some degree. I would say there's a sense to improving people for the good of doing so. It's less, and here's how they don't look like the other two ones. It's less inner focused. The anger is not here. It's all out, and they tend not to repress it. They will tell you they're mad. Or you'll see it on their face. They're not like smiling when they're mad. Which the other two absolutely do. They'll be like, I'm not mad. When they're clearly pissed. But this one is more like, no, I'm angry and this needs to change. I think BHS just talked about like zeal or zealous. They have a very like strong zeal for the right way to do things and being reformers. They want to reform people and society and kind of strong focus on the good. Yeah. So the perfectionism is like not exactly like internal in their life or their personality. I don't think they're like super organized and rigid with the rules necessarily. They're gonna maybe even go against it like an 8. But again, all in service of the good. So
Yep.
that makes them look a little bit less the other two.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What about the twos?
As one choose heart types. Okay. The self-pres 2 is an interesting one. They are called, help me out here.
I privilege.
Is that right? Privilege? Really? You might be right.
I think that the technical titles are in the back of my book, and I have flipped to the
Let's see. I have the book here. Yes, you're right. It's privilege, which is very interesting. I think. Oh yeah. So we're getting into the vice of pride, with all three of the twos.
Mm-hmm.
So it talks about like a need. It's a little bit more for not like they're privileged. I think that like I'm not really sure how she's using it as privilege. I should probably, this is not one I'm as big on. This is a little bit less common of a two. I'll just say this because it's a counter type.
This is what I have written down. This might clear. I took a note when I was going through this that I'll be needy to stay attached and in service to my needs. So I'm going to be needy.
Yes. Instead of you are needy, I'm a little bit needy.
Yep.
Correct.
Take care of you is more kind of like, I even have the note written down like cute seductress almost.
Yes.
I'm going to be kind of needy so that you
take care of me.
Yep.
Yes. Which it doesn't sound like the helper at all. Which is why I think people that could be twos are twos there because they get thrown off by the term helper. But if you're self-preservation two, you are looking for help, but not to help others, but to be helped. There's this sense of internal lack that you can't help yourself. And so I think the pride that comes into it is kind of tricky, on that end. I'm trying to think a best way to describe how pride comes into it. There's an unconscious withdrawal, I think, that self-pres twos do in this pride. So they're not going to tell you that they need help, which would be very the opposite of their vice. It'd be very pride hurting to tell you they need help. The pride comes out in this sort of like passive ways of bidding other people to help them. And so I think that's what can get kind of sneaky with the pride situation. Yeah. I wish I knew, again, I don't know that many self-pres twos, but I do think that the inner quality of like how the pride manifests would be very fun. If you know anyone that is, or if you are one, please comment. I'd love to kind of hear about what the self-pres two kind of feels like. But again, like we're noticing in the counter type, or even with the self-pres dominant, it's not outward driven, it's inward driven. All you self-pres types need to figure out like, where's this energy directed inward about safety and resources.
Yeah. And even kind of like, I almost kind of I think around it as I'm going to deny my pride.
Yes.
So that my needs get taken care of. So deny the vice of my pride. Yes. There and just be so needy that I would attract someone who could take care of my needs.
Yes. So it's like, so that's like a myth, like they're lying themselves, but it really is still a sneaky kind of pride to do that to people, right? It's like I don't really, need to tell you. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the social?
Just know. The social two is called ambition. And they don't always look like twos either because they're very intellectual. They, again, are very about the group and the herd and all of that. But they tend to be more powerful, kind of like an 8. They know how to help in very, very effective ways. And so they gain information, they use their intellect, all to drive them for their heart. And so they think they know, again, here's the pride, the best way to help the group, the best way to contribute to the group or to improve the group or just whatever it needs, they think is needed. So there is less of, you can't help me, the group can't help me, I can help the group.
Yeah. And even to the service of, I'm going to help the group get somewhere so that I can get what I need from the group.
Correct. Yes. I want the group to eventually meet my needs, but
the group
that's very repressed. Usually it's more just like, I know, and I don't have needs.
Yeah. I have written down that they seduce the group, whereas the other one is the seducer. This type of two groups in a way.
Yes. The seduction, it sounds, again, we use that word in sexual terms, but it is more of just like putting your energy out there for a particular purpose.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, and again, all this is like, if you're dominant in this instance, you're not going to see yourself doing that, but you may receive feedback that this is something you come off as.
Exactly.
So feedback is good to listen to. So the sexual two is called aggressive/seductive. This was every time that I read about the sexual two, it sounds very interesting. They're very charming. They tend to really know how to get people. And I think on both the sexual bond kind of way, like on a date, but they also know it just how to get people to trust them and to be close to them. So I think there's this charming quality to sexual twos that people are attracted to. And the pride can turn into narcissism. I think all three type twos, it can be that way. To keep an eye on that, because I think narcissism comes into pride, don't you, to some degree, of like, I don't have these needs, you do. Or so like or you're going to provide my needs, and so like it all becomes about that. And I think they can, I don't know, I think they're just good with people on that end. I think that they just naturally know. And again, this is all instincts. We talk about natural. It's not like something they learn to do. It's just something they do without thinking about it.
Yeah. So I have like a little note that they seduce individuals, and that the pride is in the ability to attract or kind of seduce or pull others for their own.
Yes. Yes. To create, I think there's that creating dependency that they like. So that person ends up meeting their needs on an unconscious level.
Absolutely. So what about around the circle, unless you have anything else to say about twos, what about threes?
Let's move to threes, self-pres threes. Self-pres threes are called, I think they're the most hardworking, I believe, of the threes, and they all work hard, but they're called what? Remind me.
Tasker.
What?
I have high energy multitasker.
Yes, high energy multitasker.
And the word efficiency written down.
So self-sufficiency, yes. They're not depending on other people to get things done. They will do it themselves, which they are the counter type. Let's highlight that for a minute. They don't look like the other threes because their image is still important to them, but it's not outward. They actually can take very pride or have some vanity about not having an image or a pretty one, so they can be vain about not being vain, which is interesting. Well, the other two threes are really like, I take good care of the way I look and how I come off to people, where self-pres threes aren't really that way. They really are focused on the image of being good, actually, which can really mistake type them as ones, actually.
Ones, and maybe even sixes, because there's a little bit of like, kind of like a goodness or a morality.
Yes.
Like
they'll say that, like, I this is the right way to be, or this is the good way to be. But it really isn't like gut or at all. It's very like what I think society says is good. Or maybe just what I think is good or I feel is good. And so that's where they're crafting that image. But self-pres threes are very more inward driven in that way. They're not necessarily looking to the group or a partner or one other person to tell them what good is or how they should work. So their hard work. It's called security. Yes. They're also the most anxious of the threes. And have you heard this too, Alex, that anxiety is really common with self-pres dominant types?
I was honestly just noticing it in my notes as we were talking. I don't think anybody said it as clearly as you, but it makes me, honestly, anxiety is lack of control, the unknown. And if you're more, I'm just like talking this out loud, if you're more fixated on how are my needs going to be met? How am I going to self-preserve myself?
Yes.
Anxious.
We're going to be anxious about that the most, or inward focus too. Sometimes relieving anxiety is talk therapy, talking to someone else, or being in a group setting where we feel safe and secure, or talking about it with a group, getting a normalization. So I think that when you're really self-pres dominant, where it's not natural to do those two things, you're going to have a lot more anxiety.
Exactly.
So I think when we're going through these, let's keep an eye on like where anxiety might look like, because I think self-pres threes certainly have anxiety. They're driven to be good because they're anxious about what you might think of me if I'm bad or I make a bad choice. Triggers my shame, which we talked about in the other discussion about fear and grief and loss and all those feelings that threes are running from. So I think that the self-pres, it's very internal of an experience, for a self-pres 3. So on the outside, they're going to look like a 1. They're going to work really hard. They're going to be pretty organized about it, pretty efficient, multitask. But it's still, they're going to have the 3 experience of being a hard type.
Yeah. Even, I don't know if they would, I have a friend who's a self-pres 3, and I think he would say, I actually am the best of the 3s. So.
I think, well, because there's this vanity and not being vain. It's like, they're like suckers.
Oh my goodness. What about social? The social.
Social 3s, I think, are called, I'm not ambition. I get this mixed up with charisma. No, that's not that. Charisma is the sexual. Prestige. Very similar. Social 3s are concerned about status. Mm-hmm. Social status, which makes sense, right? Climbing the kind of corporate ladder or the family ladder or the whatever group kind of social strata you have set up. That's what they're looking at. And so maybe education, like piling on degrees or letters after your name is a big deal. What other things that society values? Money to some degree, like having a lot of money. Looking like you have money is maybe more important than you having it. It is more, they tend to be very smart about how to do that. They know how to like come off as successful. And so they can be good coaches and that sort of thing to help people do that, because some people have no idea. And in fact, they're working very hard against that, and that's not good. So, but they also tend to be very aggressive in that. I think the sexual 2 is the most aggressive 2, and the social 3 is the most aggressive 3, which I think is interesting. I'm not sure why.
I almost even think that like you kind of have to, because if I have like the note of influence written down and they're fixated on the social conditions and how do I rise to the top of my social.
Yeah, you have to knock some people down on the way up.
In my aggressive pursuit of influence and success and to be seen, you kind of pushy, I would imagine. So
yeah. So I think the social 3, the self-deceit. We didn't go to I totally forgot. We need to go into the vices. So the vices for self-pres 3 kind of look like self-deceit about their security. They're never secure enough. And so they lie to themselves, say that they are, if they do enough things to keep themselves, like work hard enough, they're fine. Scary. And so then the self-deceit for the 3 is that maybe they are at the top, or that they can get there if they work hard enough, they knock people down. We're going to that image is really who I am, of that status I'm striving for. The self-deceit really is defined as lying to self. It's not like, 3s are liars and they're like, that's their issue. It's like they really believe their own bullshit in that way.
Their own selves. Exactly.
Yes. Of like, they tell themselves what they want to believe. It sounds like just positive self-talk, right? Like we teach that. I'm like, no, tell yourself good things. But if you're 3, you got to be careful with that. If you're 3, because that could really just be self-deceit. You're really like telling yourself something that's actually not true to keep yourself comfortable, or to make sure that you never have to confront your own self-image. Exactly. That maybe you constructed in a house of cards.
Exactly. So what about sexual 1-to-1, which I have as charisma, or like the masculinity, femininity?
Yes, that's an interesting one. Sexual 3s, charisma, masculinity, femininity. Self-deceit really does come in the form of my image and how I look to you in this relationship is good and perfect and great. And so they tell a lot of stories about their intimate relationships that are maybe not perfect, but there's this desire for it to be so. And so they work really hard on, if I do enough things to make myself look good to you or be good to you. Because again, 3s, I think it's not just about like good makeup and, outfits. I think that's a superficial idea. It really is the whole package, how my personality comes off to you. Yeah. I want my personality to fit maybe those masculine ideals of what you think the ideal man is, or those feminine ideals, what do you think the ideal woman is, including like any kind of personality thing. I'll be a chameleon. I personally think Taylor Swift is a 3, and she has a song on her newest album, and yes, I am a Swift fan, about being like a chameleon. Sorry, what?
Mirrorball song. No.
Oh yes, Mirrorball. Yes, exactly. I don't have the lyrics memorized. Do you? The line is so good. It's about just being all things to all people, kind of. Yeah. And I think sexual 3s are the best at that. You know, I think that they really can create the person that you're looking for. Without, again, this is all very unconscious. And so that self-deceit is really like, this isn't a mirage, this is real. I am that person, and they believe it.
Yeah. I'm looking up I have like sex appeal and beauty is really a unique like focus of uh
Yes,
sexual one-to-one threes in that way.
threes. Yes, I think that's true. I think that not all sexual types are sexually oriented or like kind of like preening in the feathers kind of way to attract a mate. But I do think sexual threes are that way, maybe because of the image, the self-image thing. I don't know. But I think, yes, the masculinity, femininity, being the ideal woman or man in order to attract a person. Maybe it's even just like to have the sexual energy in the room. It doesn't have to be like, I don't know, like in a bad way, just sort of like, this is what I'm putting out, the vibes I'm putting out there in the space.
I want you to know, mirror ball, I'm a mirror ball. I can change everything about me to fit in. And then a little bit further down, you'll find me in my tallest tiptoes, spinning in my highest heels, which is a very ultimate, like the feminine of the feminine, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes, exactly. When I heard that, I was like, oh, Taylor, come on, honey. But she's kind of making fun of it too. She's like, this is not good.
Her bad rap, but she's amazing in my opinion.
I know, she's great. She's worked so hard. And nobody gives her the credit she deserves.
Yeah.
So that's, I feel about Taylor. But she does a good reflection, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So let's move on to fours and to, before we get to the type, talk to me about the envy vice.
Yes, envy. Envy is not like, I want what they have. Sometimes it's like that, but in the four, again, it's really particular to subtype.
Yeah.
The envy is really more of the experience of what I have right now in this moment is not enough. And so like, this is somehow bad or lacking or distressing or causing me suffering. Yeah. And so that's what envy is.
Yeah, a little, I'm on the outside looking in, and
Correct.
I like, again, I love that word longing, that there's this longing, or there's almost kind of like a romanticized, there's a way it should be, and I don't quite.
Yes, and I'm not there, and this is not here. Exactly. Yeah. The outside looking in, I am on the outside, so that's the experience of envy, is to be on the outside, versus where reality might say you actually are on the inside. It's just hard to see when you believe it so strongly.
Yes.
So envy does cause a lot of suffering for the four. As all devices do for each type. But the self-pres 4 is the counter type. They are called the tenacity. They work really hard. They don't look like fours. In fact, I believe Beatrice Chestnut said that self-pres 4 didn't even really exist, or like people didn't understand them as like a type until like she did her research. Like it was like, nobody, like, if you, like they just said you're not a 4, you're clearly something else. So these like 4 types are, of course, this is what happened to the 4, right? Of like, nobody knows where you fit. 4 4s. But
the long, they're long suffering. They
long suffering. Yeah. Yes, they're not going to tell you about their suffering, where the other 2 definitely will at some point. So like their suffering is a secret to some degree. If you love them, you know them, it's not a secret to you, but they're not going to be like sitting there, okay, I got to tell you what happened today. You know, this was really hard. They're not going to do that. They're long suffering. And so the envy is experienced truly as I am not enough. And so like, and also this, my life is not enough. Who I am is not enough. And so someone else is, or that experience. And actually, no, I'm going to say this instead. I will say that they will say that they're, because it's self-pres dominant, so they're going to be looking at like their home, their physical needs, maybe even like their bodies, like this is not enough.
Yeah.
And so like their resources or their energy, there's never enough of that. And so like the envy of like, I wish I had more. So they might work very hard to get enough of a good house, a beautiful like space, because the 4s are really concerned with aesthetics, to find that outside of their envy is what drives them. So the self-pres 4 are introverted and very big feelers, just like the other 2 4s. They're driven by the same issues as the other 2, but they aren't going to look like dramatic, I don't know, the terrible stereotypes we put on 4s. I think that there's this sense of just personally not being not enough, this was striving to get whatever brings their environment safety to be enough. So, and that causes a lot of suffering, and they just sit with it.
Yeah, and that maybe also too that they kind of in a unique way endure in the
Yes, they can
like,
endure a lot of it.
Yeah, what feels like
because they're not working to fix it.
yeah, yep. So
They tend to let it just sit on their lap like a cat. Like, I don't know why I've used this analogy with fours before. Like the other two fours like, look at my cat. I think because I know fours that like cats.
Yeah.
This is more poor cat. Let's talk about my cat. And the other ones are just like sitting in. You can't pet my cat.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say with it causes me a lot of pain, but it's sad and like you won't know.
Yeah.
And it's like it's just a very personal experience.
Yeah. What about the social four? I have shame as the
Yes, shame. I have worked with this type probably quite a lot in therapy. I work with a lot of fours in therapy. I'll just say that. I love fours. And social fours have the most suffering, I would say, due to there's just quite saying all 27 subtypes. I think Beatrice says this too. The social four endures the most suffering.
yeah.
Due to their envy and due to how they experience their envy on a social scale.
Yeah.
Like literally they walk into any space in their group, their family, school, friends, work environment, and they have this deep sense of, I don't belong here. If you feel like that every single moment, and it's like a deep understanding of that, and like, this is not enough, I have to work really hard, make sure I belong. It's just very painful. It's very painful.
Yeah. I even have the note down like that they really want to be seen in their suffering
Yes.
and
Yes.
almost kind of the I have a superiority complex about my inferiority complex. Like
Yes.
identity is so rooted in the fact that
About the suffering. Yeah. So the cat is me. Like this is, you need to see my cat.
yeah,
This is my suffering cat. And you need to see this. It's very important that you understand this. If you understand my cat, you understand me.
yeah, yep.
And like that is, and so there is this, yes, it can be confusing to people a little bit because especially with all fours of like, why don't you want to fix that? Who wants to suffer? But with the social four, you have to understand there is a sense of they really think that without that, they're not a person.
Yeah.
Which again brings into, so the social,
Well, it's kind of
the envy goes into the, go ahead.
I would say how I know I'm alive is a little bit of the
Yes.
my
Yes. Pain brings me an awareness of being alive. Yes. And so they might even cause their own suffering to kind of make themselves feel alive. And have a blind spot about that. And like, it's hard to see kind of how they do that. Where it's really easy to be like, well, the group doesn't get me, and et cetera, et cetera.
right.
The group may not get you. And that's sometimes both true. But sometimes it's hard to see where they kind of contribute to that. The sexual four apparently is the most angry four. They're emotional too, but they're called competition.
This gets mistyped as an 8, I think. Sometimes that big
Yes, because there's a lot of energy pushed outward.
Yep.
Still, I mean, the self-pres is pretty inward. Social, I think still is pretty inward, but they'll put it outward too. But the sexual four is pretty outward. I mean, they will have melancholic moods and things internally, but the envy is really like about the partner or the bond they have with other people of like, this other person doesn't understand me, and I will make you understand me until you get it.
You know, I have written down that if the self-pres is long in suffering and if the social is kind of just straight up suffering or wants to be seen by the group in their suffering, that actually the one-to-one sexual four is more kind of I will almost make others suffer.
Make others suffer. It does sound very harsh, to put it that way. I've heard that as well. And really it is about like this taking of the suffering that's really crucial to the envy, because the envy is like, remember, it says I'm not enough. So if I feel that desperately, it has to go somewhere. And so like, it's going to go on the person I love. And so if you know someone that's sexual four, there is a sense of, you have to be aware of that dynamic of like, it's really coming from this deep internal suffering, but it's really like being pushed out.
Exactly.
It's an animal instinct though. At the end of it, it's just like, they're very vocal about it. It just comes out, it's unconscious. And it just like strikes. They're mad. Hurt people, I think is the thing that we talked about and Beatrice talks about with this.
And I think though it's more kind of like, again, a longing for, I want you to understand the life that I live.
Yes.
we can kind of, I think it even like, I'm like, oh, that kind of sounds like demonized in a way, or really,
Yes. Oh, they can be. Fours are very nice.
it's really just kind of a strategy put on by four so that other people, they want other people to try to understand their life.
Yes, exactly. They're working very hard for that love and acceptance and to help them manage that suffering of envy, really. It's like, it's very hard to sit with that particular vice. It's hard to, I think the vice hurts everyone. I mean, as I said, there's no nice upside to the vice, but that suffering can really be more apparent in others and other people and affect relationships in different ways.
Absolutely.
Sexual four is definitely one of them that's tricky.
Okay.
Okay, five, let's go to head types.
We're going to round to the head types. Okay. So
Yes.
avarice or greed. Type
Yes.
about that vice, what it is and what it is not.
Yes. Avarice or greed kind of makes you think of Scrooge. It's counting of his pennies and such, and but Bob Cratchit can't go home for Christmas Eve. I would say Scrooge probably is a 5, but that's the typical presentation of someone who's like greedy and with money. And I think 5 sometimes can be that way, but really it's a fear of there not being enough resources. And I would say that it's about hoarding, like we're hoarding actually not just resources, but affection. And we will not give that out. It feels like too much.
If
that's hoarding everything, information, feelings, it's just like all of it is inside myself because this is the safest place to be. So again, we're going to go with it. Each subtype will look different, but that is essentially what the avarice is.
Which makes me think if that's kind of it's kind of a greed or me first, or I need to make sure I'm okay, is just the 5 in general at their core type. When you put a core type 5 with the self-preservation,
yes, it's a lot. A lot of hiding inside. Yes. So my husband's a self-res 5, bless him. And so it took a while to type him actually. I mean, I was really an Enneagram for years, as you all know. And so for whatever reason, it was difficult to type. And I think but ended up being, this is being very resonant for him. And I've talked to other 5s and thought about the other differences between the subtypes. And self-pres 5s are focused, yes, on their environment and feeling comfortable, but my favorite phrase for the self-pres 5 is the battery life 5. Meaning like they start out with a certain amount of battery, like your phone at the beginning of the day, and if slowly it like goes down another. I swear it is like that. And like interactions with people, so, like working in any capacity, just like all these different things that maybe aren't like what they perceive and believe give them energy are going to drain them very quickly. And so like when they got nothing, they literally think they got nothing. So there's that hoarding of like holding that inside of themselves. All of that energy goes bye-bye. When it's a myth and, like there's this belief about it, but it's very strong. And the self-preservation 5 is called the castle.
Exactly.
No, is that right? And it really is like my castle is very important to me. So my home, it doesn't mean that they like want their home to be perfectly looking or something. They're not like working really hard to make it clean or something. It's more of just like safety at home. Like if they've been out, yes, I want to be home. I want to stay home. I want to be with myself, or I need to be alone. So again, the more I'm inside myself, the better.
Well, I think that, I really I've never heard that before, but if you kind of think through the battery of what you're saying is like, I think that probably 5s are really good at boundaries. Like I actually know how much I
won't feel bad about saying no.
No, but if it's kind of like when I do get down to being at the bare bones, there is this like castle sense that it's like, I need my sanctuary that is going to allow me to fuel.
Recharge me. Yes, it will be like, I need to go get plugged in like a machine.
Yep, I have the note written down. They just build the hole for one.
Yes.
Kind of like a bunker in a way.
Yes, correct. It is an internal bunker. Right, exactly. There is a sense of like, very much like, that's my special place, and no one can really get to it. And they're right, no one can. And so inside their mind and their bodies, like it's a very safe place. So the fixation on hoarding that is very important to the self-pres 5. They tend to be very warm people though, which is very interesting. They tend to be better at social interaction than the other 2. So it's actually a ploy sometimes, so you don't get too invasive. If they're nice to you, you're not going to be like, wait a minute, what's his wife like, or whatever his kids like.
Yeah.
He'll tell you just enough, but not anything else. So it's like there's this sense of like being very careful.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
boundaries though.
What about the social or the we? I don't know what you have, but I have totem or
Yes.
transpersonal guide professor.
Yes. So this one's an interesting one. I don't actually know you personally, but I've read about them enough. I think I can describe it. The social 5 is hoarding a lot of knowledge, but they tend to be a little more like ones. They like to teach.
Yep.
They're going to share their knowledge, but it's connected. They don't really like the hoarding is more about emotional sharing with people. They're not going to do that. So that's where avarice and the passion comes in. But they are really like, they collect a lot of information, probably more even than the other two, like the professor vibes or whatever. They really like expressing what they think and principles as much as possible. And so like, but they're going to be very careful about sharing anything personal or emotional, especially. So that's where
Yeah. I have in my notes that if like a self-pres is almost like a hole for one, that
Mhm.
social is more of a castle with a moat, and they want to have a party, but they don't send invites.
Yes, yes, they do. They do. Again, they're focused on the group, like all social types are. And so they're like, oh, the group really needs to know, that thing I learned about the origins of white supremacy or whatever, so I'm going to tell them. But yeah, they don't know how to extend the invitation, because the invitation to have people come to your party is usually about emotions and affection and sharing of yourself. So that's where the moat breaks down.
So what about the
So sexual 5, counter type. Yeah. So those two are the typical 5s, kind of like real strong head types and like loves knowledge and things like that. Sexual 5s do love knowledge and they do collect a lot of that, but they're called confidence, which is interesting. I think that they are more fixated on the ideal spouse and sharing more of like who they are. So and they don't look like a 5 in that way because they are emotional. They sometimes look like 4s. So they tend to they will be more open to sharing who they are with that intimate partner. But at the same time, the avarice is still there. They're hoarding their personal needs and wants and feelings with the other person. So the emotionality, I think, can be very intense, and the connection can be really intense, but they would prefer it really to be about shared ideals and principles and ideas and new exciting things that are thrilling, because sexual types are all intense. So the more intense it is, the better. So the sexual type doesn't really look always like that, because they can be confident about what they know and share it. And if they're vibing with you, I mean, it's great. It's really fun.
It's almost, I like it that you focus in on that like connection piece, because if 5s are, it's more kind of like this person is what can maybe refuel my battery or gives me what I need.
Yes.
Greedy with that person and those connections.
And they don't need anyone else. Yeah.
Hole for 2,
Yes.
hole for 1, moat, castle, hole for 2, essentially.
Hole for 2. I like that. Yes. A hole for 2 and nobody else. Yeah. But it is, the avarice is still present, even in that hole of like, I don't share difficult, vulnerable things very easily.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the sexual 5.
Right, we only have 7s. I think we're going to make it.
I think we are too. 6 and 7. Okay. So we got self-pres 6. These are what they call the phobic 6s, which is the self-pres and social.
Doubt or fear is the vice.
Yes. Doubt or fear. They are, yes, they kind of go against fear in some certain ways. And I think the phobic 6s means they are more in touch with that fear on a more obvious way. Excuse me. So I think, let me find, what is this self-pres?
Well, it gives me it gives
forms.
Okay.
Yes. So their fear is of like not being protected and survival. So literally my home is not safe. My material needs, like money, it's never enough.
Yep.
So there's this sense of fear is being injected into self-pres needs of resources, energy, and survival. So they're pretty introverted too for that reason. But with other people, they're super warm. And I think the reason that they can come off very warm and kind is they want to make sure that they can count on you in case they need you. There's a security, again, very, very strong security base, and that's still fear.
Well, it's kind of the question of, if the question of am I safe gets met with connections and alliances.
Yes, Correct.
The way I'm going to self-preserve is through my relationships with people. Like,
Yes.
I get the posse around me when I need it.
Yes, they're the most anxious 6 too. Again, we go with this most dominant self-pres. Their anxiety is strong. But again, with a warm personality, they're not gonna be like, oh my God, I'm so anxious, I need to talk to you. Like, they're not gonna necessarily come off that way because they're concerned about how they come off, so they don't want to scare you off. They want you to stick around. So the warmth, they're really, I mean, they're good people, but again, this is the ultimate like strong drive of the personality animals. Like, I need to feel safe as much as possible, and I will do what I need to do, and that includes being warm with you, and if I don't even like you very much.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So what about the social, or kind of like the we 6?
Yes, the social, the we, the like, this is about duty. That's what they're called. They're called duty. They're very about obligation. I found social 6s. They're also very warm. They're not called warmth, but I think they tend to be about doing the right thing for the sake of the right thing, because we've always done it that way, very traditional ways of doing things.
Yep.
Their fear is that the group will let them down or the group will abandon them. So again, like, I can't survive without the group. So there is this fear that they on their own, and that's all all the 6s are afraid of. They can't survive on their own. So the self-pres 6 will look to their material needs to keep them safe, but the social 6 is going to look to the group. And so how they do that is they focus on the family. Really, they're like, okay, so my family's going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to plan this activity and make sure that everybody is on the same page. And if someone's not on the page, we're going to make sure they're on the same page. So social 6s in that way are really great at planning parties and getting people together, and like, they tend to be extroverted too, but they also don't like going against, not like doing non-traditional things. Like, if you push them to like do something different for Christmas next year, it's gonna be like,
No thanks.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, kind of that whole idea of like, I even just like, what is my duty? Well, duty is really guided by guidelines, by authority, what somebody else.
Yes, it's outside of themselves. It's not like, I want to do this. This is important to my values. This is about the group has demanded this of me, even though like I haven't really thought about that, but that's just how I've always done it. Like, yes, it's very authority. Yeah, they fear authority and they mistrust it too, but they really will toe the line. The tallest blade of grass gets cut off, I think is the Japanese proverb that Riso and Hudson talk about with the 6s of like, don't stand out, we're going to stay the same, because we don't want to get cut off.
Well, even just, I think to kind of add to like, if self-pres in answering that am I safe question are all about alliances, I think the social is more that am I safe question. They're really going to make sure that like everybody is okay. And
yes,
the way they do that is by sticking to what it is.
Yes, we need to all stick to what we can know, we can trust, what we did last year, what we've always done, and don't rock the boat. So in that end, like, that's the fear driving that social instinct.
Exactly. All right, the sexual.
Really fun one. Counter type. This one does not look like a 6. They're not very warm. They are going to be in your face sometimes. They look like an 8, often mistyped as an 8. I've seen panels where there's like a whole bunch of counterphobic 6s on the 8 panel and vice versa. I'm like, what are you doing there? Well, mostly 6s on the 8 panel, not the opposite. Yeah. Most people want to be an 8, not a 6. So the 6s, so counterphobic 6s are interesting. They're counterphobic because they go counter, they're counter type, of course, which sounds like correct, but they don't go away from their fear like the other 2. They're not like figure out how to manage their fear by going to the group or resources. They're going to address their fear in a very intense way. They're going to, if they're afraid of heights, you know what they're going to do for their spouse next weekend. We're going to go bungee jumping, right? So that's what they're going to do. And that's like a kind of a silly way to put it, but in more practical ways, it is like this, I am driven by fear, I must conquer it.
Yeah.
So if you have freaked them out, they are after you. If something you have said or done is scary on any level, they're after you now. And that's their fear driving their intimate relationships.
Well, again, too, it's kind of like with that question of am I safe? It's almost like, well, they're going to take a stance of intimidation or like strength, because it's almost like I'm going to smoke them out. You know, like if you're not safe,
I'm going to handle this. I'm taking care of it.
Yeah, well, it's even too is like, if you're not safe, I'm going to push you to your limits till you reveal that you're not safe, or you reveal that you're trustworthy.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. It's a very strong kind of personality in that way. They're going to confront you a little bit more. They're going to try and smoke them out and like find where the problem is coming from. They're still problem solvers, like all 3 6s are. They're not doing it for control. Like I think that people assume, well, 8s are usually doing it for. Again, you see here that behaviors are very similar, but the reasons they're doing it are usually the vice.
Yep.
So
Well,
the fear is driving that behavior.
yes, I have even in my notes, it's like the best defense is an attack. Turn against fear
Yes.
with strength. Need to feel strength and can be verbally and physically bold and intimidating to
Yes.
done.
Yes, they need to be ready to conquer what's out there. So like there's this like a good defense is a great good offense is a good defense. Whatever. Yeah. Yes, I was gonna look this up. Yes, they're gonna like go on the offensive pretty quickly in order to protect themselves and to make themselves feel safe. They can be protective, but not in the way the 8s are. They're more about their, again, intimate relationships. So fear comes out the most in that, and if you're in an intimate relationship with a counterfocus 6, you're gonna see that heat the most, and so that they're gonna go after what scares them, and if they're not looking at their other instincts, they're not gonna think of, it's gonna be unconscious. They're just going after it, whether or not it could be really dangerous too. Like maybe you should be afraid of that, but it's still like we're gonna conquer it.
Yep, exactly. Let's round the corner. So gluttony with type 7 likes.
7's actually, I get stuck on 7, and I don't know why. I think it's because when I talk about gluttony, it feels so similar to lust. Like it even sounds similar when you hear the words together. Gluttony usually tends to focus on food, but of course it's a spiritual sense.
Yep.
So it's not just food, although it can be. I think it's just about excess, but again, that sounds still like lust. So this is just where I'm at with it. I'm still learning. I think it's about excess. It's about like, if this amount is good, more of it is better.
Exactly.
Every time.
Exactly. Well, even just too, I think that if we think about it, even in like the fear in the head, that and like if their fear is I'll get stuck in my pain.
Yeah, it's like deprivation.
Yeah. Whereas I think that like an 8's intensity or lust is not, it's more power based than it is fear.
Yes, I think you're right. So that's a good point.
I'm going to like thirst and like hunger after life and keep seeking it out, mostly so I don't get the pain right here. I'm going to keep moving forward so I don't have to look at this,
Right. Yeah, it is more distraction oriented versus power. You're right. They're like distract themselves with gluttony. And so if we think about self-pres 7s, which is called Keeper of the Castle, which is interesting, they express gluttony through the formation of alliances. They collect on a family network in the sense of, I'm reading the book now, in the sense of banding together with trusted others and create a good mafia, a partisan group through which they can get their needs met. They rely mostly on those they trust.
Yeah.
It's very, they're good. They're really practical people, good at networking. 7s are almost all 7s have really good social skills, I've noticed. I'm not sure what that's about, but there is this sense of like excess. Maybe we all like people that are wanting to do more and have more. But I think that the gluttony and the excess can kind of really come out for the self-pres type. And that distraction from not really thinking they need people on an emotional level, perhaps, or like allowing themselves to experience pain. Very tricky.
And even just your network is the main way you take care, because it's like, oh, if I want to do yoga with goats, there's only so many people that are going to want to go do yoga with goats.
Right.
To do that, whereas like there's only also so many people who want to go read books in like New York Public Library, and it's kind of they're very different things, and it's like I'm going to pull from my network to have to do that or take care
of to help keep me safe in that kind of resourceful way. And it is very strategic on that end. It's not just anyone. I don't know if they're introverted. I actually don't know any self-pres 7s. I don't think this is the counter type though, because the next one is the counter type. So they're going to be focusing on avoiding pain and all that. But it's still a desire for pleasure and distraction as much as possible. So the social 7 is called sacrifice. This one is a very interesting type. And I do know a couple of them, so I think I can kind of draw off of what I know and also what makes sense. So they are called sacrifice because they're almost what Beatrice Chestnut calls counter gluttony. So meaning they will actually work really hard for other people. So they look like twos. They're commonly mistyped as twos. And so they're gluttony. So in order, again, though, remember it's about avoiding pain, and that excess of doing too much for others is their blind spot. And so like they really want to improve the world and so again, they're focused on the group and survival. And so if the group is good, they don't have to feel pain.
Yep. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I think they're a lot more responsible than the other two. I think the other two tend to be a little bit more like pleasure focused and hedonistic and pleasure seeking in that way. This one is not that way. I mean, I think they do like to have fun, like a lot of sevens, but I think the distraction is really about others, which is why they're called sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, I even have the note written down here that is helping me in this moment to make sense of it, because they're still gluttonous, but I wrote down, I will self-sacrifice in a gluttonous way.
Yes.
In a way of like a model of service, that it's almost
yes.
The gluttonous thing is I almost am self-sacrificing of myself.
In excess.
Yes. Yep.
In excess. Yes. Always in excess. There's no moderation, which is the antidote to the vice here. There's no moderation or sobriety here. It's all very too much of one thing, which in this case is helping, which is like, what's wrong with that? Well, you burn out and you end up experiencing pain anyway. So
I feel like this can, I have the note written down, they can look like a prideful minimalist,
Yes.
Like I've curated and I'm so sacrificial that my life looks minimal, but it can honestly lead, I think that this specifically can lead to some codependency and like, even like.
Yes, they can do too much for you. And I think like, and then it creates dependency from other people that expect that from them. And so they can't become like more moderate. And so then they get stuck.
Yeah. So let's talk about the last one, the sexual 7, and I have suggestibility or joyful intimate.
Or what?
Joyful intimate. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Suggestibility makes sense. I don't know. I didn't catch the last thing you said. Okay. But I think that they are very intense people, just like all sexual types usually are. The sexual 7, I think suggestibility, what it really means is they really would love to do the next thing, even if it's crazy. Let's do it. Let's see if we can. So these people are really fun to hang out with in that way, because they can tell us like how life experiences it, or like how life could be, I guess. But ultimately the gluttony and the excess, well, it is kind of typical. They're not the counter type. It's like they can never have enough novelty. Something new is always better. So they're suggestible, like with ideas, something new that people haven't thought of, or they think people haven't thought of. And so they're going to run with that and try to convince other people that's real. Let's do it. They can run away, and they're big dreamers, like they're like, and I think sexual 9s and I think sexual 3s and 4s, they're big dreamers too. I think there's this, and I think maybe sexual types is like very much like, the world is our oyster, let's go see what happens. But when you combine that with the passion, you can fall on your butt real fast because reality hurts, where not everything is possible, and so much excess really does bring us harm.
Yeah. And even I just wonder if so much like fascination, imagining, dreaming doesn't really allow for present-mindedness.
Correct.
Yes.
So, it's really hard to sit still. When in any type, I would say, any 7, I would say, especially struggles, because sitting still we might be feeling pain or emotions that are not comfortable, or even boredom. Boredom is a key word I've used with all 7s. And I've challenged the 7s that have come to therapy to examine their boredom as anxiety. Sometimes it's like a body anxiety or head, or like go back to that fear piece for the head types in the 7 of like, are you just feeling anxious? And because they're like on the next distraction thing, when a therapist asks them that, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know, I haven't thought about that. And then it causes like pain, and like, well, have you thought about this? So like they might change the subject, or they might sit with it. So that's the thing I tend to challenge 7s with, of like, yeah, you're right. Like, let's sit in the here and now and not distract ourselves with our vice. It's really difficult work.
And I'm thinking of kind of the 1-to-1 sexual 7, that it's like man, all this being in a different place doesn't actually really allow for true one-to-one connection sometimes.
No, it really, yeah. I mean, all sexual types, I would say, like, as much as we desire like real intimacy connection, we're not good at it. Our vice kills us every time. My sloth kills it, like the 8's lust kills it, the 7's excess kills it. It's like, I think when you think of also like social types, oh, they're so good with people. Like, no, their vice gets in the way of how they actually feel close to people. And self-pres types are the best at budgeting. They're not the best at like keeping their home perfect and clean and like keeping everything really resourceful. They actually can get in their own way and their houses can be disasters and messy because it's so overwhelming and it's all they think about.
Yep. Yep. Which honestly, I feel like, Priscilla, that is maybe the best place to end this is
Yes.
the whole point that we look at subtypes is so that you can get a handle on it so it doesn't get in your way of growth and
Yes.
self-exploration and connection with people and all this different.
Mhm.
The whole point of why we spent, again, almost 2 hours
Yes, almost.
is literally for the point of the more you can understand about yourself, the more maladaptive coping can be
Mm,
tweaked and just changed to adaptive coping.
yes.
That it's really, again, all the things we do is really the Enneagram is a strategy that we've put on to make sure we're okay, and it's getting
Mhm.
back to the fact that it's like, oh no, our essence is maybe okay, but we've learned a lot of really harmful things.
Yes,
So
it's
much
true. We learn things that get in our way. Exactly.
and there's so much room, I feel like, for people to be empathetic towards themselves and others.
Mhm.
Really,
Yes.
the
Yes.
whole
Understanding your type, your partner's type, your best friends, your kids' type when they're old enough, like that really can increase communication and also like
Mhm.
personal responsibility of like, my vice really got in the way and I saw that. I'm sorry. Like owning that, like that really got in the way because it's so unconscious. You don't even think about it.
Exactly. So it's just really, at the end of the day, it's primarily a tool for empathy towards your own self and how life made you that way, and towards other people that they also are not in a cakewalk. So,
It's true.
all right. Well, let's kind of end there. Priscilla, thank you so much. You have spent hours and hours with me on a video call, essentially talking about this. And yeah, I just really appreciate, honestly, the time and the investment that you put into your own self discovery that actually allows you to be like an expert of sorts among us, so much further along so that you could help other people just like advance their knowledge of the Enneagram. So thank you for
Absolutely.
your time, your energy, just like
Thank you. This
yeah,
was such a pleasure. I hope it's helped everyone here. I thank you for hosting it. I love getting able to do this. So check out our video series. We have 3 of them, and my blog too on our website, evergreencounseling.co is our website. And I know that you might link it on yours and Optimum Joy too. So Enneagram stuff, have fun, everyone. And thanks for having me, Alex.
love it. Love it. Thanks, Priscilla.
Okay.
Bye.